name's Cordy, and today's video is going to be about kind of the feel of the Helix. Some people find that they don't like the feel of the Helix stuff, and some people say that the Fractal stuff feels better, or maybe the Boss GT1000 stuff nailed the feel. And this video is exploring just some of that, and one tiny thing that I found made quite a big difference, and I'm going to be speaking to a friend about his experience with this. Yeah, so hopefully this might be vaguely interesting. Just to demonstrate what we're talking about, in the input we've got this guitar in Z setting, and by default on the Helix and the HX Stomp it's set to auto. Now this is an impedance setting, just to show you what it does. So auto is the setting it will have it on by default. So what I'm going to do is just show you this. So just by having this tube screamer and the auto setting, having this bypassed block is having an impact on the tone. I think you can find this in an even more pronounced way if you use arbitrator fuzz. And so let's just... So if you're interested in this kind of thing, there's a couple of videos. I haven't found many people talking about it, but on JCTwoTonesPrin, he's got a YouTube channel about Helix stuff, and he's done this kind of video on this and talking about specifically kind of getting good results from the arbitrator fuzz. But I wanted to talk about what is actually happening here, why it matters, and some other bits and pieces. In this auto setting, essentially the impedance matches whatever is first in your chain, or something like that. Something like an arbitrator fuzz. Supposedly has like a low impedance, I think, and affects the guitar load in a way that basically acts like a really long cable or something like that. So it rolls off some of the high end, and I think you could probably hear that in that demo. So it's doing a massive kind of roll off of the high end. So this auto setting basically takes whatever the drive pedal is that's early on in your chain, I think, and applies that impedance to the whole signal chain, whether that pedal is bypassed or not. If you wanted to override this, if you set it to 1 mega ohm kind of as a setting, I think then you'll find that it makes very little difference whether you add a pedal or not. So the thing is that a tube screamer and an arbitrator fuzz and these various drive pedals that you're probably going to be putting at the front of your chain have different impedance settings, and then if you've got a clean tone or whatever, or a drive tone like this that you've been working on, once you add in this pedal it's going to fundamentally change what you're already doing. So I first happened across this kind of setting and people were telling me to check this out when I was playing around with the fuzzes. Now a friend of mine, David Beebee from the Guitar Hour podcast, also uses Fractal products, and we've talked back and forth about various things, so I just wanted to bring him on and talk about what I found with this and what his experience also was. So I asked David Beebee to join me. He is the one of the guys from that, and you can see him there. Do you want to talk about who you are, what you do?
Yeah, I'm a guitar player. I'm host of the Guitar Hour podcast with Jake Wilson, Dan Smith and Tom Quayle. I've also just released an app called Solo, which is for fretboard visualization. I don't do a lot of video content, but I do a lot of audio content and lesson content. Teach online. I used to do clinics, workshops and things with Fibonacci guitars. And that's about it really. And chat to this guy.
Yes, we talk on Facebook Messenger and send forth, talk about it a lot. I'll blank that out, that's fine. So, could you talk to me about what your issue with the Helix stuff was as you sensed it? Because it's like a problem that I don't personally have, but I hear other people have it, if that makes sense.
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, like everyone was blown away when the HX Stomp first came out, and all that power in such a small unit. It was very tempting. I got one straight away, and there's loads of things to love about it. Certainly the size, form factor. You could get it to sound. I felt like I could get it to sound pretty good with some tweaking. And but one of the things that I ran into as a problem with it was the feel. It didn't feel right, and for the longest time I put that down to what I perceived as latency. And we talked about this on the podcast quite a bit, sort of when we were talking lots about different modelers and using modelers in live situations. And I kept running into this situation where the notes that I was playing felt just slightly detached, slightly behind where I intended to place them. Almost as I say, like I was perceiving it as the latency thing. And I coined this term as, it's like rubbery slippage. It's like the notes are rubbery and it's the slipping away from me. And it was most prevalent when I was doing this sort of more faster playing and very in time sort of legato stuff. That's where it would seem to sort of compound and escalate and be an issue under my fingers, to the point where I remember I was doing some stuff at we did, I think it was about 18 months ago when we were at NAMM and then New York doing stuff with the guitars, and some of the performances there, I was feeling uncomfortable with using it because of this issue. And so I've been down the rabbit hole researching it, talking to loads of different people about the latency about the latency aspect of modelers. And it turns out, as you've discovered now, that I was actually wrong on that. People have done, I think Leo Gibson, I think his name is. He's got a great channel, and he's just done some intensive tests on latency with these devices. And it turns out that latency, it's not the issue. I think, if I'm correct in thinking, the HX Stomp has lower latency than the FM3. Is that?
I think it used to. But with the firmware 2.0 or 3.0 of FM3, they've reduced it. So I think they're probably about in the same ballpark now.
But ultimately, I was I was just wrong with it on that. It was nothing to do with latency. I think this feel aspect of this sort of squishiness was now, as we know, to do with more of the impedance setting. And embarrassingly, rereading through the HX Stomp manual, I think, or certainly the Helix manual, it mentions that about the feel, the auto, and the variable impedance setting, and that will affect the tone and feel. And I guess the consensus is that the set to auto or lower than the highest setting, it has more of a softer feel, and I'm pretty sure that is what I was experiencing, because when you mentioned it to me the other day to try this, and night and day difference. The feel in the way I'm defining it, talking about in comparison to things like the FM3 now is comparable. It's very, very similar now. I still think I have sort of a preference towards the modelling and the sounds and the way Fractal do their stuff, but it's not like it's sort of a category difference now. I feel like I could totally make that work now in a professional environment for my kind of playing, whereas I couldn't before. And it's just a simple, stupidly simple switch.
I looked through the manual, right, and all I could find on it was this tiny, like, little few, like, sentences about what it was that kind of impedance thing does. And it says, like, something like, if you've got it with the full open, there's, like, a full range, essentially, of the, like, EQ type thing, and as you reduce that down, you sort of get, like, the sense that you're adding, like, a long cable to things, I guess, is what's sort of vaguely happening. But I guess that kind of feels like you're clipping off, like, the important transients of a pick attack, maybe, or, like, that seems to be sort of what's happening.
I mean, possibly. I just preface this by I know nothing about this stuff, like, technically, or I'm in no way an expert with this. So it's a lot of guesswork. I mean, terms like rubbery slippage kind of gives you a clue as to where I'm coming from with my knowledge on this. So, but certainly the experiential, element to it is very real, and I'm prepared to say that even if it's all in my head, that is still a consciously experience to me that is real. So it doesn't matter what the science of it is. If it's if I can't get if I can't play right, then it's not working for me. So, but as we found out, the FM3 is fixed at 1 meg.
Yep.
And it kind of all clicked and made sense then, because I think some of the other Fractal stuff is variable, but only when you are incorporating those pedals that it affects in the chain. And so all of this entire sort of, I don't know, what's the word, sort of saga of rubbery slippage that I've been invested in over the last 2 years, and frustration has sort of come to an end with this stupidly simple little thing that's probably at the very front of the manual, if it actually...
It's not,
read
don't
it.
worry about it, it's definitely not.
Okay. Couldn't remember where it was. I was just did the Command F to find search the PDF file to find...
Yeah, that's what I did, but it's not at the front, it's fine.
Yeah. So, but I mean, what it does is it takes the HX Stomp for me now into a whole new... I'm much more curious about to actually explore it more, because I think it's always been the case where I've definitely been able to get good sounds out of it with some tweaking, and I'm certainly not a master tweaker like yourself in this regard. But I can coax things out of it that I'm happy with. But it's taken it from being a chore and being sort of uncomfortable to play to actually being really quite fun. So it's really cool. It's almost like I've had this piece of gear for 2 years and then suddenly discovered it's a brand new piece of gear in the same chassis. So I'm quite excited to dig into it and sort of compare it more. Compare it in a more interesting way with things like the FM3 and the Quadma Cortex when that turns up. So
yeah, interesting, cool. Well, I think that wraps up. Do you want to talk about some stuff that you've got coming up, or that you might want to share with the 3 people that will watch this?
With you, yeah. Well, check out the Guitar Hour podcast. I have a YouTube channel, but it's pitiful. I've not done anything in years, but go and subscribe anyway. One of my 21 resolutions is to get some more video content, based content, so maybe that will happen. And yeah, do check out my website, davidbeebee.com, and the app that I've just released with Tom Quayle, which is called Solo, for learning how to visualize the fretboard and play through chord changes. And that's about it, man. Thanks for chatting, and thanks for giving me the or I don't know, how did you come about this?
I think I would have talked about this earlier in the video, but I was messing around with fuzzes, and obviously fuzz is like one of those key things where like a classic fuzz, like a arbiter fuzz face, supposedly if you do put that in front of your amp and bypass it, it can do kind of shocking things to your tone.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the areas where people like mess around with impedance and stuff and try and get it to work, or try and get it to feel like an old classic fuzz. And in the comments, some people said you should check out the impedance settings, and I was just messing around with it. And I think then, because we had spoken about neural DSP kind of feeling to you more immediate, even though it's going through an interface and stuff. And I was reading up on typical interfaces receive guitar signal at 1 mega ohm as well.
Yeah.
So that sort of made it click in my head. I was like, why don't you try this? I think that was basically the reason.
Yeah, it's interesting, very interesting that it's such a difference. I mean, it really is. If you guys have the Helix and have not tried changing this parameter, I mean, for me, if it's just really changed the game on that device, and it's not like it's a little bit. I mean, it's like night and day. The feel and the tone is huge for me. Yeah, really exciting.
Brilliant. Cheers, David.
Right, nice one, dude. Catch you later. Bye.
Stop this. So one of the things that I found when doing some research on this, or David found, was that the FM3 has a fixed 1 meg input impedance. This dog has a variable input impedance, but also the Pod Go has a fixed input impedance at 1 mega ohm. Maybe this is kind of the default setting if you want things to sound consistent. I'm finding that the way that the pickup load reacts to this 1 mega ohm is a bit more what I'd expect. I've never played a real fuzz bass, so although it may be more realistic, it's not exactly what I would want to happen in the modelling world, I think. So maybe this is something I'll be checking out more of. If we talk about what this impedance setting is actually doing, I think it's basically dealing with some real capacitors and resistors and stuff, and switching between them in the HX Stomp and Helix. And so it's having a literal physical effect on the guitar signal going in and switching through various settings. Cliff from Fractal says he doesn't think this actually affects feel. He does the same thing as this kind of setup in the Axe Effects, I think. But as a guitarist, I think feel is a combination of many factors. Is it a stiff tone? Does it respond to picking in a certain way? Does it clean up when you roll off the volume? Is there plenty of high-end content, like pick attack? All of these things I think contribute to what feel is. A delay at the end of a chain feels different to playing without delay. That's part of the reason I like to play with delay. It's got a more liquid kind of feel under the fingers. For me, this kind of little setting here is absolutely a crucial component of a feel factor, and if anything, I think that would be the way that I would describe what this setting is actually doing. It's kind of changing the feel more than anything else to me, although with extreme examples like the Arbitrator Fuzz Bass, obviously it's doing a lot of high-end roll-off. For me, what that changes is the feel of the preset, as well as the tone and everything like that. So if you've got any thoughts, drop them in the YouTube comments. Have you experimented with this? Do you have a favourite setting?
So I thought it was just worth saying that if you have a feeling that you want to maintain some of the impedance kind of stuff, so you don't want to turn it straight to 1 meg, but you also don't want it to kind of ruin things when you have a fuzz pedal at the start of your chain, here's a thing that is new to firmware 3.0 and saves you quite a lot of hassle. You go to global settings, on preferences here. If you go to the second page, there's this auto impedance preference, and you can set, so generally it was first block, so the impedance, if you had an arbitrator fuzz at the first block of your preset, it would automatically be whatever that was. So when your fuzz face was bypassed, you'd have quite a dark tone because it seems to be like a lower impedance. If you set this to first enabled, whatever your first block that is enabled, so if you have your fuzz bypassed, for example, you'll no longer have that issue. And I think this might be maybe a better way to solve this issue than setting everything to 1 meg. You're going to keep the feel of whatever the intent of this was. You know, there's a reason, I guess, that they built this in, you know, so that a fuzz feels like that fuzz is supposed to feel, or the tube screamer feels like how it's supposed to feel. You lose the issue of it affecting your tone when you've got the block bypassed. So first block or first enable, you can make that decision for yourself without having to go straight down the 1 meg route, if that's something you want to try.
Yeah, I thought this was kind of an important little discovery. Perhaps you already knew about it, but I'm imagining there's some people who didn't know about it, as I didn't until quite recently. Something to mess around with, I think, and probably you'll find in some ways a small difference, but in some ways I think it's quite a big difference. Thank you for stopping by. If you want to like and subscribe, you could. There's plenty more of this sort of stuff on the channel, whether it's lessons, talking about chords, or talking about modelers, Helix, Fractal, all that stuff. Thank you for stopping by, and you can get the presets used in this video in the description if you want them. Cheers!